Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. I will call this meeting the Standing Committee on Government Operations today. Today we have a public meeting scheduled on Bill 83, the Liquor Act, with a presentation from Minister of Finance Caroline Wozniak. I will begin by asking committee members to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kevin O'Reilly, FrameLink.
Lisa Semler, MLA for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Richard Jerker, MLA for Trinity.
Rocky Simpson, Hay River South.
Frida Martzel's Chibata. Caitlin Cleveland, Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, members. Just so the public is aware, this is our first hearing on the Liquor Act, but not our last. The committee will be traveling to Inuvik on June 7th, Norman Wells on June 8th, Fort Simpson on June 19th, a public hearing in Yellowknife on June 26th, and we are working to schedule with Hay River pending them resolving their return. Any information or any feedback and written submissions can be provided to committees@ntassembly.ca. And with that, Minister, I will turn it over to you for opening remarks and your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, let me begin by just introducing folks that I have here with me. Bill McKay is Deputy Minister of Finance, and Lynn White is the Senior Advisor of Liquor Legislation. And also in the room, I have my Senior Advisor, Drew Robertson, and also the Senior Advisor to Mr. McKay is Nora Russell. And I believe on the line we have our Legislative Drafter, Sherry Jarrok. And with that, Mr. Chair, I am pleased to give you some opening remarks. There she is. Perfect. So this is on Bill 83, the Liquor Act. Bill 83 is based on 2 years of inquiry into both best practices and engagement with industry, the public, and other governments. It proposes for you a new Liquor Act for the Northwest Territories that is more modern, streamlined, and responsive to the needs of residents. You might recall, following the Department of Finance's presentation about this Assembly's earlier and more limited administrative type of amendments to the Liquor Act back on October 2nd of 2022, with the encouragement of MLAs present at the time, I directed the Department of Finance to make every effort to, in fact, pursue the much broader amendments that were contemplated in our broad review. This was a significant undertaking, and this Act has not been overhauled. Because this Act has not been overhauled since 2007, I was very pleased to have committee's encouragement to press forward with this bill, which would have been otherwise delayed again into a future Assembly. With that, if committee is agreeable, Mr. Chair, we do have a short presentation to give some more details on this matter. All right. Mr. Chair, are we putting it online or? No. Okay. All right. Well, then, for the sake of anyone that might be following online, Mr. Chair, we'll try to maybe just describe the slides a bit more in detail, if I could. That might be a little bit helpful. So, just as an overview as to what we're going to be discussing this morning, the existing Liquor Act has been in force since 2008. So, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, that is some 15 years. And it's become quite out of sync, notably in terms of best practice noted here. So that's an awareness of what's happening in other jurisdictions in Canada, but also with public expectation. Quite a lot has changed in 15 years in terms of awareness and desire around how this Act might administer itself. It's also of note, not included as a bullet, but it's out of sync with some of the other pieces of legislation in the Northwest Territories, and those are some of the other changes that have been made, and I'll review them in the rest of the presentation. So on slide 3, for those following, this is the Liquor Legislation Review. So it's a bit of a how we got to where we are today, and that started with the Liquor Legislation Review. This was a 2-year project. It began back in 2020. And the purpose here was to find a path towards having liquor legislation that was more modern, more streamlined, more responsive. Those main objectives I mentioned earlier. And it involved jurisdictional scan work, literature review, and a significant amount of engagement with those in the industry, in the business, but also the public and other governments within the Northwest Territories. Out of that liquor review in slide 4 came quite a number of recommendations. But of note, about 80% of the actual recommendations are really matters targeting the regulations or the operations, the existing operations of the board. Only about 20% directly related, or 14 specifically directly related to the matters in the Act. That said, Mr. Chair, you really, as I think many will hopefully appreciate, you can't go and overhaul regulations if they're tied to an outdated piece of legislation. So, you know, even though people might be saying, we'll just make this little change over here in the regs, you can't just make the little change over in the regs if the legislation itself creates barriers to be more flexible. So although the recommendations weren't targeting the act, they really are a necessity to move forward. And here we are, slide 5 is where Bill 83, although it only targets 20% of the recommendations, it's going to hopefully open up the ability to do the remaining work now. Slide 6 for those following. The rest of the presentation is keyed around 4 objectives, and they are as follows. 1, to streamline how industry is regulated. 2, to ensure the safe public access to liquor. 3, to enhance community control over liquor. And 4 is to modernize liquor enforcement. And so I'll spend time on each one of those now. I'll start with number 1, streamlining how the industry is regulated. So here, one of the big things is we'll be introducing a new licensing approach with a registrar position. So right now, everything has to go to the board rather than to a registrar, which is frankly a bit unusual, but certainly very cumbersome. And by having a registrar position, we'll most certainly be streamlining the ability to move things along. Of note, it also means that there'll be the ability then to have an appeals process to the existing board. So rather than it being the board only, it's now quicker at the front end for what are often simpler applications, but then with the ability to have a board dealing with appeals. And a compliance scheme here too, sorry, it's the middle bullet on the presentation, introduces scaled penalties, monetary penalties, but scaled penalties, so that not everything has to go to a full hearing. There can be gradated penalties, which is, again, more modern, but also something that people can be more easily applicable when there's a smaller infraction versus if there's a much more significant infraction. There's, you know, just a gradated degree to which people will be having to be brought into compliance. The second objective, if you will recall, and so now on to slide 8, is to ensure safe public access to liquor. This is mainly here where we are now going to be allowing different types of retail outlets. So rather than just having the one type of outlet that the minister then applies, which is quite limiting and doesn't give a lot of choice to communities, this means communities now would have the ability to choose different types of opportunities. I don't have the definition or the terminology right in front of me. I'm sure we'll get to it. But now there's just some different options. So you don't just have to yes or no to a liquor store in your community. There's, you know, just a range of options that may be available depending on what a community wishes to see or not to see within their own communities. The slide 9 has the third objective, which is to enhance communities' control over liquor. So flowing from the comments I was just making, there's a lot more opportunity now for communities to decide when and how licensed sales or retail sales may be introduced. Also the ability to seek the closure of retail sales if that is the wish of their residents, giving some procedural fairness opportunity to businesses to address if there was to be such a decision by the community. And also adding some community control by clarifying who exactly is able to make decisions and bring forward a request for changes. And last, by updating the types of liquor systems that a community can vote on in a plebiscite. As I was just mentioning earlier, there's going to be some more options now rather than just essentially, you know, an on or off switch, which sometimes doesn't really address what communities are asking for, and then doesn't get, you know, it's difficult to get out that is telling, and the controversy remains. Fourth, the final objective that was sought in this Bill 83 is the modernization of liquor enforcement. And here, this is where when I was saying we were out of step with other pieces of legislation in the Northwest Territories, it probably is predominantly in this aspect where now we have updated how inspections, investigations, and searches can be done. And also will be modernized by updating rules around public intoxication, focusing on the safety of individuals involved, and giving peace officers more options by which to assist in such circumstances should they arise. And Mr. Chair, that is the conclusion of the presentation, and we are happy to take more detailed questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'll now open up the floor for any questions from committee members. Emily Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As a starting point, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if we as committee can maybe get some background information from the minister and the department sent through to the committee. And I'm thinking of jurisdictional scans for liquor administration, public consumption laws, and local liquor delivery. And if that's something, those jurisdictional scans are something that can also be shared publicly as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, while certainly interjurisdictional scans are routinely done, they weren't divided out by topic or theme. So they, we don't have an answer to one piece. We just have general jurisdictional scans. So, but I mean, a copy of that could be provided to committee. It's just not broken down thematically. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Cleveland?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the minister for that. The piece that I wanted to start by asking about is the special occasions permit. And I'm wondering if the minister can provide some additional details on how the special occasion permit process will be streamlined and how that will take place. And I'm also wondering, just thinking back a few years here to when cannabis was legalized in the territory, and they still have not seen special occasion permit regulations drafted either. And so I'm wondering if there is an intent to draft mirror regulations for cannabis special occasion permits at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that there's a connection between the cannabis regs and then the drafting of the Liquor Act regs. The Liquor Act regs are already, there's already a timeline here, subject, of course, to this bill receiving assent sometime between now and the end of the summer. But we are certainly anticipating that there will be, that this is one of those things that can be going through the registrar rather than having to go through a full board process, and expecting that that would also be online as an online application process to make things more easy. But yeah, that again follows the timeline associated with Liquor Act regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from committee? Emily Martsours?
I'm just wondering what the options are, the different type of options for liquor sales that are, I want clarity on that, because I really consider liquor almost like a drug. And, we're promoting more sales because we don't have a lot of income coming in within this government. There's not enough revenue that comes here, and so we're, making it's going to be easier for access. It looks like with the different options with small communities and like we have a liquor store in Fort Smith, but I mean it's I just worry about the different options for the communities. Like, what is that all about? We have so many problems with alcohol and drug related, and we don't have like the means to address them even in the territories, and yet we're promoting it more. I just want to know the rationale behind this whole presentation and looking at this Bill 83. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm actually quite happy to speak to this. Look, the revenue that comes in from liquor sales is a tiny wee little sliver of the revenues of the government of the Northwest Territories, so there's by no means any motivation from a revenue to the government standpoint of changing the Liquor Act. It just doesn't make enough of a difference, honestly, in the total revenues of the government. I mean, it's really a small percentage. And so, but what we do want to see, and that's where I think the question is exactly getting to what our community is now going to be able to do. So right now, under the Act, they can't necessarily remove, they can't vote against to have a Liquor Act or liquor store closed. That is now something that would be changed. They cannot right now choose different options. So for instance, if a community might say, well, we want only a beer store, that's not an option. You get it all or you get none. Or, you know, you want to have other types of restrictions on it. Right now, it's really in or out. So the idea that we've heard here is that communities are recognizing they don't necessarily want prohibition completely, but they want the ability to be a bit more selective about what is allowed in and what that liquor store run might look like. Or in some cases, they may want to shut down a liquor store. We've certainly had some communities that are asking for the ability to say we want to run the option of not having any liquor sales at all. But if they've already got liquor sales happening, that is not an option. So, so it's in that sense that we're really looking to give greater variety of options so that they can be more restrictive and not less. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Emily Martselos. Further questions from the committee? Emily Simpson.
Thank you. Chair, I guess one of my concerns is, is more around positions in that. When we make changes, I suspect that changes are going to impact, or may impact jobs and those type of things. So, you know, we're talking about the registrar's position, and we have the NWT Liquor Commission located in Hay River. So will changes within this, proposed within this act, have any impact on jobs in Hay River, or will it, you know, whether it's adding jobs or taking away jobs? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're not anticipating any changes. I mean, again, shifting to a registrar, if anything, just, you know, allows to streamline the responsibilities, but everything's right now still planning to stay as it is, or nothing being taken away. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess the registrar's position there, I'm just wondering if that would be located, if it would anticipate it would be located in Hay River, or if it would be a position that would be in Yellowknife. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staying in Hay River.
Thank you. Any further questions from committee? Emily O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I think there's going to be a shift of responsibility from the Liquor Licensing Board to a Liquor Appeals Board that would be created by this bill. And I'm just wondering how the staffing complement is going to be affected, if at all, and where the Liquor Appeals Board would be located, or is that just too far down into the weeds to know at this point? But I guess it would be helpful to get some thinking about where this is all going. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, the board right now is one that is appointed by way of, you know, a competency matrix that I asked to have, I think, fairly early in my tenure in this role, so as to ensure that we were finding the right demographic representation of skill sets, but also representation across the Northwest Territories. The members are from around the Northwest Territories, not necessarily Hay River, and for the moment, we are anticipating to maintain that same structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily O'Reilly.
Yeah, I kind of leapt ahead to my second question, which was about the board composition, but what about the board staff? Like the Liquor Licensing Board, I presume it's in Hay River, they have staff. Are some of those staff, what happens to them? Are they going over to the Appeals Board, or is the Appeals Board going to hire its own staff? Where is the Appeals Board Administrative Office going to be located? I guess that's kind of what I was asking. But I appreciate the information on the other stuff as well. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, still anticipating, again, just as right now the board is administratively run out of the Hay River office, that would just transition to administering and operating the board there. If anything, right now, again, this is you know, they're more busy now than what they would maybe potentially be under an appeals if they're only receiving appeals and not having to receive, you know, every single application that runs through. But and so to that extent, not anticipating a significant human resources change, but that is a little bit further ahead from where we are, but I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from committee? Emily Simpson.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, yeah, looks like there's a shift to education enforcement, which I'm glad there's an education component in there, because it's important, I think, that, we, maybe get away from enforcement a bit more and deal with more educating young people in that. Can you just give me an idea, I guess, of a sense of, what does that mean, and how something like that would kind of be rolled out, and who would it impact as well, and how would be rolled out in communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm actually inclined to send this to Ms. White. I was just looking quickly to see if I could find it, the detail of the gradation of approach to enforcement, but I'm not seeing it. So if I might send it to her, and I'm sure she'll be able to describe it.
Ms. White?
For the question. Shifting to education and enforcement approach is more a philosophical approach than something that's you can point to a specific reference in the legislation. It's about including inspections, as are done now, but also adding things like educational programs for the industry, recognizing good practice, and not only just looking for bad practice, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Emily Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one thing here is, as we make changes, there's always going to be costs associated with it. So just do we have any idea on, if we're talking about education, like who pays for that? So what would be, do you have any sense of what the added cost to making these revisions to the Act? Thank you.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't know that we're expecting a lot of added cost right now. Well, first of all, this is a revolving fund, so there is money available to do the costs of, related to NTLCC from within the revenues of NTLCC. But I think, I think I mentioned this earlier too, to the extent that the board right now is being called upon to do a lot more, and it takes a lot of effort sometimes to get a board that may not all be in one place to do a simple amendment to a liquor license, those cost savings, hopefully in terms of time and human resources, can be passed over to the side of now having that go through a registrar. So we're not expecting anything that would certainly not impact from a government-wide perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, I have Emily O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So a few things here. It looks, and the minister spoke to this in the slides, that about 80% of the issues and concerns that were raised can be handled through regulations. So is there actually a work plan for the regulations that need to be amended, a timeline for them, subject matters that are going to get considered, and what sort of public engagement, if any, is being contemplated? And if the minister doesn't have answers to all that, if the minister could provide that in writing to the committee, I think that would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, so I certainly can give a very general work plan let me just start before I forget the second half around public consultation. I mean, that was the subject of 2 years of the work that's gone on already, was to ensure that engagement and consultation was done. So in coming through the liquor review process, there was a lot of outreach and engagement and public consultation and Indigenous government consultation and stakeholder engagement. And that fed into where we are now. It's just that the structure of the Act will respond to all of that by having first the Act done, and then that allows the regulations to be drafted. So it's just the response to all of the engagement is coming in two parts. First part is before you now, and again, on the hope that this bill will receive assent sometime before the end of the summer. That then allows the drafting of the regulations to begin, so that legislative drafting will take place over the first half of, or rather during 2024, excuse me, and regulations should be finalized before the end of the 2024 calendar year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Emily O'Reilly?
Thanks. I I was trying to scribble it all down and I couldn't do it fast enough. The minister seemed to be reading from a note or something. Is that something she could share with the committee? Thank you.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, it is in a letter that committee should have received, but it may be that it's sitting at the JHL's office. I honestly can't say, Mr. Chair. I think I signed off on Friday, to be fair. So we'll make sure that it is coming from, down the hall to your hall as quickly as it needs to. Yes.
Thank you, appreciate that. I also recognize committee sent 33 rather detailed questions, so appreciate the turnaround. Next on the list, I have Emily Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just in talk about engagement and the engagement process that happened in order to put this this bill together before it was passed over to committee, I'm wondering, because in that same time period, parallel to that work, there was also an alcohol strategy being drafted by the Department of Health. And so I'm wondering if they were able to look at this piece of, or this bill before it came over to committee, before it hit the floor, if Health was able to take a look at this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I know that both, I think, frankly, Ms. White, as well as staff from Health and Social Services met regularly as both things were moving forward. So what I'd suggest is I can have her speak to more detail exactly where that overlap occurred. Thanks.
Ms. White?
Thank you for the question. Yes, indeed, myself and the Senior Advisor for Problematic Substance Use with Health and Social Services met regularly over the course of the 2 years, and it was quite fortuitous that our projects were about the same timeline. And we exchanged information and occasionally attended each other's engagement processes.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Emily Cleveland?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that response. I think that's a really important piece of information. I'm wondering if there were any, because I know that within the alcohol strategy, there's a lot of kind of information about best practices that was gathered nationally and then also abroad. Were there any recommendations that came forward that were seen as being outside of the scope of a Liquor Act that Health had kind of suggested come forward in something like this? Or is there, I guess I'm wondering what didn't make it, if anything, and if that's not something that the department can speak to, I'm comfortable with that as well, but I would like to know if there was anything kind of deemed out of scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, I think it might almost be easier perhaps to speak to what is in scope, if I might, and I can certainly turn it back to Ms. White if there's anything that I missed. And I say that because the alcohol strategy itself is largely focused on, initiatives that are under Health and Social Services or under social services to some degree. But what is very much within the scope of the Act, one is the ability to adjust prices to reflect the products that are lower in volume in alcohol, so that there's that price incentive to actually shift towards a lower consumption of alcohol. Secondly is having minimum prices for standard drinks in public areas, which again is something that comes out of some of that national work that's occurring. And the third one, again, is around increasing community control. So just giving, again, some different tools where if the community wants to remove completely an existing alcohol sales opportunity or shift to having, again, only beer or only whatever it may be, those are things that are within the control and within the purview of the Act. And so that is here. I haven't asked that question for the last couple of years. I'm getting the thumbs up, Mr. Chair, so maybe I'll stop and see if that's answered what Ms. Cleveland was looking for.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments from committee? Emily O'Reilly?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree that the bill is going to provide community governments with a greater input and maybe toolbox to consider liquor, retail, and so on within their boundaries. But how is this going to work in a place? And I'm thinking, we got a whole bunch of different communities. Let's okay, there's just the First Nation Council. Then you go to a place like I'll just pick one, a Clavic, where you got Clavic Community Corporation, you got a First Nation, under the Indian Act. You got the, corporation or the entity for the Gwich'in settlement area. Who's the community government in a place like that? And who gets to make the decisions, the rules around when plebiscites might be held and if and so on? So, because that's not spelled out in the legislation anywhere that I could find. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, I'm sure someone here can direct you to the specific section of the Act. What we are proposing to do here is to actually remove some of that uncertainty that does exist right now. People who may want to petition their local government don't know which government to go to, or governments could not be sure who's supposed to take the reins, even just to get a temporary prohibition order. I know there was more than once just in the last few years that I've been in this role that I had a government not knowing who was the right entity or body just to seek a special temporary occasion permit or prohibition rather for a standard event. So definitely an issue, and I appreciate that. But what we're proposing to do here is to actually have it designated as there would be a designated local authority, and it would be the authority that provides the municipal services, which certainly doesn't prevent if there is different levels of government or different governments running different functions within a community. They certainly can work together in whatever capacity they may choose to, but it's the entity that provides the municipal services would be the one that would be the entity that would come forward. And this is for the entity that would come forward to request changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Emily O'Reilly?
Okay, yeah, thanks. So who makes the decision over which government provides municipal services? Is that something that the department decides, or MACA, or who makes that determination, or is it going to be spelled out in regulation, or where? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, as I expected, someone has since filled in for me that local authority is defined in Section 1 in the definitions and then is used throughout the Act. So that's where this is found. It would be authority that the minister is designated, and it is found right now in GNWT policy. It's used in MACA. So for an example, the EMO, when they look to a municipality, this is how they do it, is by doing exactly this process. So we're trying to align ourselves with a process that community governments would already be familiar with through the EMO, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from committee? I have a quick one. Can someone just explain to me a little bit further what's the streamlining of the special occasion permits will look like? I'll note some venues say you hold a wedding, and you do it 12 times a year, you need to apply for 12 special occasion permits, and then you need to apply to the Office of the Fire Marshal 12 times, so you will result in 24 inspections for the exact same event. They don't quite like that. Is there any ability going forward to get a special occasion permit for multiple dates, and or working with perhaps bringing some of that Office of the Fire Marshal overlapping inspection into the process? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, this is one I would probably also have Ms. Rice speak to a bit more in detail. I think she's turned her mind to it with her team a lot more, but just briefly, it's, again, having the ability to have multiple different types of classes of vendors makes a significant difference, because you're not now all lumped into there being only one option. If there's only one option, it gives very little opportunity to allow special occasion permits easily. So, but most of this, again, is one of the things that will fall into the regs. So, because now, once under the Act, there's the ability to have different classes, then the regs can speak to those different classes and what each one will allow. And the other one being moving things to an online system, which really, having to file anything by paper is in and of itself immediately cumbersome. But I would just suggest, if I could, on this one, to see if there's anything Ms. White wants to add. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. White?
Thank you. As the minister said, most of what constitutes a special occasion permit rules, if you will be in regulations. There's not in the bill itself. But what we're contemplating in terms of streamlining is looking first at operations, so what things can be online, what government departments, if there are multiple involved with this process, how can they speak more quickly, more efficiently together, being clear about what an applicant needs in terms of applying for the special occasion permit, and being very clear about that, and having ways for them to upload that to a portal, for example. Some examples.
Thank you. And can I just perhaps, I guess, a commitment to take it back and see how the Office of the Fire Marshal fits into there? I think probably the liquor inspector could do all of that same work, but I mean, maybe we have to have both inspecting for a special occasion permit. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am happy to make a commitment that we will go and have a sit-down chat before we come up with our regs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Emily O'Reilly?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, I'm looking at this, local authority issue again, and I see that, the term is defined in the first section, and then subsection 2 says, for the purpose of definition, local authority, the minister may designate an authority as representative of a community other than a municipality. So the minister makes that decision. Where's the decision found, though? Is it published somewhere? It's not done by regulation. So, and I confess I haven't looked at the rest of this act with enough, but I've been known to raise this issue of whether there's a public registry of some sort or some way for the public to actually find out when ministers make decisions. So if the minister makes this decision about designation of a local authority, where would that decision be found? And is it accessible by the public? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we're certainly, again, because it would be something that's still in the regs, not that it hasn't been considered, but might I suggest sending this to Ms. White again, as there's at least to speak, of where we expect this to land, not wanting to get too far ahead of when we haven't done step 1, but if I could turn to Ms. White, please.
Because the minister will be designating the authority that is not a municipality, then that designation would be a formal designation in writing, not necessarily in regulations, although we haven't, as the minister said, we haven't put our mind to the exact details, but it will be something formal. It's not loosey-goosey, if you will. And the council that is so designated would be formally aware of this, would be notified and involved with that decision.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Emily O'Reilly?
Yeah, thanks. And I confess I don't think I've had enough time to read the 4 or 5 pages of regulation making authority here, which is more extensive than I think I've ever seen in any other legislation in the Northwest Territories. But I just did a keyword search on designated, and there doesn't seem to be any regulation making authority around this. So anyways, I think, but there's obviously a whole bunch of decisions that are made in terms of licensing and permits and appeals and all of this kind of stuff. How does anybody know, and where would they find this stuff? Anyways, that's a question that I constantly ask when I see bills coming forward, because I'm sorry to say this, our government seems to have a default position that something is not made available to the public unless it's actually required by legislation, which, anyways, that's my personal experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, if I just want to see if I understand correctly, it's the idea of which communities be designated as the municipal authorities. Is that what we want to have somewhere listed publicly? Because that doesn't need to be a secret, Mr. Chair. Agreed.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments from committee? Emily Martellus.
I used to run we built a new store in Fort Smith, and I ran the local liquor store, the new one, for 14 years. And it wasn't that complicated, even with licensing. I think with all the way the Bill 83, it just seems like it's making it more complicated with all the definitions, with all the, and going to a local authority is not always okay. You know, you have a group that wants to do something different within the community, and if they're not in, you have, the oversight is not neutral. When you're going to liquor licensing and giving out, because I also gave out the licenses out at the store once it was approved, right? They came and they paid the fee, and we also brought, I don't know if they do it that way anymore, but you know, and you try, and you don't question a lot of things because it's usually approved by the Hay River group, and that's the way it was. The way you're going now, it seems like it's, you know, the oversight for neutrality, or because someone doesn't like you in the community that you're going to have a problem with, and it's, you know, it could be anybody. It could be somebody over, if it's under the municipal or if it's under another group, and you know, it's not neutral oversight. So I'm just wondering about that because I know it's you know, when it used to be, it was not so complicated. Like when I look at this now, holy cow! It seems like we're making more out of more than we have to do. You want to keep it simplified so that everybody has access. You know, I'm not one, that's why I got out of it, is because I just didn't feel right socially with doing what I was doing, even though I was doing it at the time. And but you don't want it to be so that it's over-regulated by people that are not neutral. Everything is about neutrality when you're coming to business, okay? And you can't get into all the politics of a local whatever or a local group, or you can't do that. Everybody's got to be treated the same. And we always said that when it comes to government regulation. And so I'm just wondering how you're going to address that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm quite happy to have that exact question. I know committee is well aware that there's a difficult balance in the Northwest Territories between some individuals and leaders and communities who may want to see more access, frankly saying, look, prohibition's not working, we've tried, we don't want it, we want to make choices about what's allowed in. Others who are more on the side of none, some who want to have, you know, a wider range of opportunity from an economic perspective, particularly, you know, and I've certainly heard that, I think, Mr. Chair, here, of, you know, allow people to have economic opportunity. So it is a difficult topic because there are such divergent views. But what I do think actually is happening here, I hope does strike exactly the balance. And so allow me to then just explain in course of answering Emily's question, what is being allowed, what a community would now have the authority to do, which they don't now, is the idea of a license. So the idea of being issued some form of license now is not, there's no community decision making at the front end. Let's say if a community that currently doesn't have any sort of alcohol store or liquor store of any kind wants to have some type of license available to them, that doesn't go to them. And also there's only one option, it's a full liquor store. Whereas now they would have the ability to say, yeah, we're open to there being a license issued. But then beyond that, it goes to this registrar. So they have that say initially at is this a path we want to go down? And if they say yes, and if there's a range of licenses, but we don't want to be at the top with everything, we want just, you know, the ability for special occasion permits to be issued, or whatever it may be on the ladder. Then it goes all to the registrar, not the appeals board, not the cumbersome, you know, handout process. Now it goes just to the registrar. So I actually do think it hopefully will answer that, where the community would get a front end ability to say, yeah, okay, we're ready for that here or not. And then the administration of it, exactly for the reasons Emily is mentioning, to not have to be as cumbersome, goes to the registrar process. And if you're not happy, you then get to go to an appeals board, which you right now don't. Right now, you're kind of stuck. And people frankly wind up coming to my office, which is not the place where, I don't want to be making those things either. That's not transparent. That's not, we want something that has a procedurally fairness-based process. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You, any follow-up from Emily Martselos? Any further? Emily O'Reilly?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So, sorry, I'm going to beat this one more time. So, yeah, scanning through the bill, the registrar seems to be kind of the place where a lot of information is held, whether an issue that they can issue notices, they take initially handle some appeals, they issue licenses, they can suspend, cancel things. But I don't see any provision in here for a registry. Like, you got the person, but there doesn't seem to be any provision for a registry. And anything about whether that registry, what it would contain, whether the information is public or not. And that seems to be the missing thing for me is, if someone has a concern about a liquor license in their community, or where do they go to get the information? There just doesn't seem to be anywhere in here where people go to get information. I guess the registrar's gonna have a physical office somewhere, but anyways, I think there's a need for a registry and something around what is on the registry, what's available to the public. That just seems to be completely missing from the bill. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm going to do something and sneak in two answers to one question. So first is to go back on the designated authority. Mr. Chair, I figured someone was finding it. The designation power on local authority is subsection 1, bracket 2. And they are not normally published generally, so it certainly could be put on the website, but it could also be published in the Gazette as part of public notice. So those are just some options, but I leave it to committee. I don't personally think there needs to be any great secret about this. It's not a big deal. We're happy to follow committee's suggestions on that. Now, with respect to the existence of a registry, there is a public registry already online. And all decisions on licensing are indeed already made public. So that information is available. The NTLCC is right now our holding place, if you will, for all such things. So again, I'd encourage folks to take a look. It is right now available. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Emily O'Reilly? Any further questions, comments from committee? Hearing none, that concludes our public hearing today on the WT Liquor Act. I'll just remind anyone who is watching that we are accepting written submissions at committees@ntassembly.ca, and all of our future committee public hearings are posted on the NT Assembly website. So please reach out with any comments, concerns you have regarding the Liquor Act. That concludes our public broadcast. Thank you, Minister.